Hello, welcome back to the David Watson podcast. I've just had the great pleasure of talking to Cevin, and fundamentally the conversation is about his book and how schools are failing and why they're not working for your children, and maybe what we could do about that. Hello, welcome to the David Watson podcast. Thank you for listening to my rant. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I appreciate your rant. I appreciate rants in general. That's kind of what I do on certain subjects, certainly the one we're going to discuss. For me, I'm very passionate about.
Yeah, before we get off onto that, I literally, while you and I were talking earlier, you're wearing a Liverpool hat. Liverpool football
Yeah. Yeah, there's people are very passionate about their sports, in the United States, but it's a little different. I think with the exception of the Boston New York rivalry, which is cultural. Most is fandom, but and certainly the football clubs that you're passionate about in the UK or even the rest of the world is a cultural thing. But here it's like, I kind of avoid the some of the passions, and there's like the people who are football fans in the United States are this very supportive culture, and you become part of this community. So wearing whichever team it is except Manchester United, which gets into its own
yes.
thing.
So you are actually talking to a Manchester United fan. Which is...
when I went to Manchester United, then that was a little different in terms of the interaction I'd have with the football fans.
Yeah.
But this one, it's like it immediately is like this bonding thing, and people start talking. So it just becomes for me. I don't have the same. I don't follow football to the any of the same degree as, but I'm a big Beatles fan. So
yeah, but that makes sense.
I chose Liverpool.
But that's how kind of similar situation when I was a kid growing up. My dad wasn't into football at all, and a guy called Brian Robson was the captain of the England football team. He was also captain of Manchester United. Because I live in the south of England. I don't live anywhere near Man United or Manchester. I don't live anywhere near it. But growing up, he was captain of the England football team and captain of Manchester United, and my dad didn't support football. So that's the guy for me, because I like to. But I'm even as a Manchester United fan, I'm an admirer of any club. I thought Liverpool last season were phenomenal. What a season they had, and I thought we had a great Premier League last year, because although Liverpool sewed it up quite quickly, we had Newcastle winning the Carabao Cup, we had Crystal Palace winning the FA Cup, and do you know what I mean? And we just like, man, we the spoils were divided. Everybody was winning. It wasn't kind of dominated by Manchester City or Liverpool. Everybody kind of had a little dib in it. And I thought for football's sake that it's just good sometimes to have that sort of a year. Obviously, it's disappointed that we finished as low as we could finish, and Tottenham also won a European, and it was just, I think for English clubs it was phenomenal. But I'm definitely hoping this year that Man United at least are not propping up the division for everyone else to stand on their shoulders like we did last year. But time will tell. And I actually hope that Liverpool have another stellar year, because obviously with Diego Jota sadly passing away in that car accident, it's going to be a massive impact, because he was such an integral part of the team. And so our thoughts and prayers with his family. You tell me what we're going to talk about.
It was my understanding that we're talking about education and the challenges of compulsory schooling, and my analysis of schooling as or compulsory schooling anyway, as something that is fundamentally harmful and destructive in its design. Nothing wrong with education, but the system itself and how it's designed to instill whatever it's designed to impart is quite harmful, and where the bad outweighs the good, and most people have really been conditioned not to appreciate the harm, even though they, by and large, endured this and have been, traumatized by these systems. And it's in response, I created this book, the Student Resistance Handbook, that teaches students how they can fight back against the system. But usually it's walking through exactly what the problems with compulsory schooling are, and getting people to understand and appreciate just how bad things are.
So what is the? I mean, because luckily we kind of have a long format conversation anyway. What is like the how can I'm trying to think how to get best to the point. Let's start with what are the problems that compulsory education as it is today causes?
So I think there's a lot of people when they look at, the history of compulsory schooling is the history of reform, because it's never worked. In the United States, the system was brought over in the 1850s from Prussia. So it was actually conceived and designed in Prussia in response, actually, to the defeat by Napoleon. There was a complete disarray. The soldiers weren't obeying the commanders when they were doing, kind of an assessment as to how they got routed so badly. And they figured that they needed to basically train the youth to be obedient. Yeah. And they needed a system. And so when it was brought over to the United States, it was understood that it was used for this, but it was like, well, what if we took this system and we tried to use it instead of that, but to promote some egalitarian values? And Horace Mann was the person who in the United States who brought it over here. And the first place it was tested actually was in Massachusetts in 1852. And prior in 1852 they did a census. And they found out that the literacy rate in Massachusetts was 97.2%. So they weren't bringing in schooling because there was any problem with literacy. In fact, the United States, for its history, it was sort of the envy of Europe in terms of literacy, and it was something. A lot of it came from the Protestant values of needing to learn the Bible, and when the Bible was translated to English, and to basically read and have that capacity. So the schooling system wasn't even brought over for the purpose of literacy. It was a project for social for a kind of social. I don't know if reform is quite the right word, but certainly it was an experiment, obviously, because anytime you bring in something, and change something dramatically, it is an experiment, and because it's never worked and we've been stuck with it. Oh, and actually, when it was brought in, there was a big revolt, even though it was only like 2 days a week for like 4 hours, each day. In Massachusetts, the police, the National Guard, had to be called in to quell unrest in the communities who didn't want to turn their children over to be sent to these schools, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. Again, it was only when it first started, just a couple of days, but no, the parents, were not having it, and it had to be put down by the National Guard. So it's never worked, and it's never really been defined what it's for. But in the process today, whenever it's discussed and the people look at their system, it's like, oh, well, the schools aren't working, and it's the fault of either the administrators, or it's the teachers, or it's the parents, or it's the kid. Someone in the system, is responsible for the failure, or maybe all of them, or some of a few of the groups, but those are the four groups that are always blamed, and it's always the students are the ones who always have to endure the consequences, whether they're and so they're always the easiest to blame. But there's people in the system. There's times where the teachers who are working, it's like, oh, the administrators are terrible, and a lot of times, there is some fair criticism of different parties to certain degrees, but ultimately it's the system itself that is the problem. The system itself is everyone is so married to the system, they can't think of a different way of educating, and there's the convenience of it that's arisen because it is a babysitting factory. You can't get rid of schools because you need to work and you need free daycare for the kids. Where are they going to go? And then you can't. Your imagination has been so destroyed and eroded that that it's hard for anyone to even conceive of an alternative for how you'd educate, and people are sort of trained to scoff at any alternate approach. But once you have a system that is designed for social efficiency, and it's designed to be a factory where you have the reason why you have many kids go to an institution all at the same time is the efficiency model, is that you want to have everyone do the same thing, learn the same thing at the same grade, so you can pass them through, because the resources that would be required for individual attention would be phenomenal. You don't have that. So once you have a system, and this is all to take for granted, this isn't anything new, but what is you have to understand is once you have a system that is designed for the efficiency, the very first lesson, the very first thing that has to happen in an institution like that is that students must learn to take orders in a docile manner. Yeah. And there must be obedience to authority. That has to be the first lesson, because if students aren't sitting in their chair, shut up when the teacher's talking, stay in place in this room at this time, there's chaos. The whole system falls apart. So the very first lesson has to be obedience to authority. That's the fundamental essence.
The reason, the reason I'm practically laughing is because if my mum was here now, she would say, because I've heard it so many times, I knew the school just as well as David did. So I got kicked out of school. I was on report, and I was, I kind of, school was for my entertainment. I wasn't the best of students, and I often. And I don't have an issue with school per se. I could just... The two incidents that really stand out for me. One, I was getting kicked out of class because I would have been messing about. And the teacher shouted at me. And I was just like... And my dad was in the army. And I just looked at this teacher. And I would have only been about 14 or 15. And I'm talking to a grown male adult. And I just said, I'm not in the army. You can ask me to leave politely. And he just went off his rocker, and I just stood there, and I just said to him in front of the whole class. And I'm not trying to brag. I was just like, no, hang on a second. I've got no problem with being kicked out of class, but you're not going to shout down at me when you can ask me to leave in a courteous manner. Because if you ask me to leave in a courteous manner and I don't, that's where the issue is. But I am not in the army, and I am not my dad, and I will not be barked orders at. And that's my mum got called into school for that, because I refused to leave the classroom until he spoke to me in what I considered an appropriate manner. And all he did in the end was, David, I've asked you, would you please leave the classroom? And I was like, yes, sir, certainly. And I left. But and the second one was because I was always smoking. And my objection to not being allowed to smoke is because teachers used to be allowed to smoke in the smoking room. And you're saying I can't smoke because I'm a student. Well, that's nonsense. Because in the UK at the time, especially when I was 16, you were allowed to smoke. So they had this really weird rule. I could smoke on the other side of the school gate, and the school couldn't do anything. The minute I stepped inside the school gate, they would be allowed to confiscate my cigarettes. You know what I mean? And he's just like, but there's teachers in that room there smoking. And legally, these are not legal rules. So yeah, I'm kind of with you, because I was a bit like that as well. But the other thing I'd say is, I don't know. I don't agree that it's the best system, but I've never ever come up with a better one.
Well, you don't. I mean, when I get to the end of my soapbox or speech, it's nothing. Literally nothing is better than schooling. Not having compulsory schools, when you appreciate the degree of harm that is manufactured by schools, and so literally nothing is better than schooling. So it's not like you're forced to think of an alternative. I mean, there are alternative approaches and models and things, and I can certainly happily discuss that and show how there's better. But there are ancillary fundamentals like the obedience to authority, but it's you can't pursue your interests, and you have to cope with boredom. Those are also it's really the but it's the way the school environment causes neurosis, depression, anxiety, stress, and those are some of the worst. And there are studies showing how schools cause students to dramatically decrease their empathy for other people. So that's profound. Irvin Staub was this researcher who did studies. He set it up similar to Stanley Milgram. He did the obedience to authority, but Irvin Staub, he'd put have a kid sit in a classroom, and a teacher would tell him to stay there, and there'd be a person in the adjacent classroom who'd be screaming for help in some capacity, that they were injured in some way. It'd be the same message, the recording, but it would, or something like that. They to keep it consistent. And depending how little time you spent in school, didn't matter the age, but how little time you spent in school, it affected how whether you would help this person who was screaming for help. And, the longer you had been institutionalized, the least likely you were to help someone who desperately needed some attention in some capacity. That was one way that study was set up, but there have been some others as far as assessing empathy. But it's that degree of indifference that comes from it. But the anxiety and stress, one of the things that the Centers for Disease Control every 6 years does studies on suicidal ideation. And while they don't differentiate age by how people are educated, because there's big homeschooling and unschooling movements in the United States, it seems pretty clear because of the stress in schools that there's a profound difference, and that compulsory schooling is responsible for what is otherwise epidemic proportions of suicidal both. I mean, the numbers are so staggering and so high that I had to, and it's not just one study from 1 year. You trace it back, over decades, and it's only gotten worse. Currently, one in 12 students. So an average classroom is 24. So 2 students on average will make some kind of attempt on their life, and 1 in 6 will have serious thoughts about suicide, about killing themselves, and make some kind of plans for it in some capacity. And when you look at the mortality rate for COVID, which shut down schools, the mortality rate for suicide in schools is dramatically higher than it ever was for students for COVID, under COVID, and it's just something that's swept under the rug, that isn't really addressed or dealt with.
I wonder how much of it. I definitely remember incidents when I was at school, and I left school in 1991, so I couldn't imagine what school was like for my niece today. But I wonder how much this coincides, the increase, because I don't ever remember anybody committing suicide when I was at school, but I do remember kids that or other pupils, students that were self-harming, and they would be the ones you heard about, so that wouldn't be an accurate number. They'd be the ones that you didn't hear about, But I wonder if how much of that increase is also linked to social media, smartphones, and that kind of. Because one of the things I've always advocated about when it comes to trying to understand bullying, different from when I was at school, is when I was at school, you couldn't bully me once I got home, because there was no way to contact me. So summer holidays or something like that, 6 weeks, I might never see a bully again for 6 whole weeks. Kids getting bullied, they wake up to a message on a phone, and it's a weird thing, but the way that the brain works is if you never feel that you can be safe, you never feel safe. Whereas if like 80s and 70s, 80s, 90s kids, the bully was only a threat if he was in front of you. It didn't matter if he said, "I'll get you after school." Yeah, no worries, I'll go out the other gate. Do you know what I mean? I'll walk out with the teacher.
So Jonathan Haidt, definitely is this researcher from I think NYU who's shown, that's about the effects of social media. But where you can see the impact of school on suicide and also on bullying, it has to do with the demands of the school itself. So you'll have a dramatically higher incidence of suicidal ideation in the so-called good schools, the ones that have the highest demands for achievement. So if parents are given the opportunity to select which school that their kids go to, they'll say, well, which ones are going, have the higher rate of going to college or going to the best schools, best colleges. And those are also the ones that have the highest, suicidal ideation. So the schools the parents want to go to, they just look at, the so-called success rates, and they don't look at, the fact that, you're going to, you're more likely to drive your kids to self-harm. And you see that dramatically in South Korea, as far as, there the pressures are intense and the suicide rates. But bullying is the same way. The more authoritarian the schools are, the higher instances of bullying there are. And the reason is it's kind of the same as the prison model. The reason for that is because if you have, the less power you have and the less control you have over your own life and what you can do, the greater the need is to exert that power in some capacity. So you're going to bully others so that you feel some sense of control. It's the only way you can feel control over your life. And schools, the reason why bullying is so prevalent in schools is because students have so little control and power over their lives in general. So it's a very sick environment, and it manifests itself in other ways too. The one thing in education circles that they always try to study and never can come up with the solution for is something called the achievement gap, and it's why people from a lower socioeconomic status will do worse than the more affluent, the students from more affluent families, and they try to chalk it up to racism and all sorts of things, and so they make all these adjustments and they never work, and the reason they never work is because they can't acknowledge that the reason for this has to do with the school itself being manufacturing stress, and that the students from the more affluent backgrounds tend to have better coping skills because they don't have the same struggles at home that they have to deal with. They may have, there could be, families that go through divorce or something like that, and that'll be reflected. But in general, there are certain stressors that they don't have to deal with, so they can cope with the stressors in school better. And so they're going, so much of school, which is again why where the Student Resistance Handbook that I created, comes into play, has to do with if you want to survive school, you're going to only do so if you can cope with stress. It's how you can cope with stress. Otherwise, you're going down, and you're going to turn all the failures in school that you experience inward. You're going to blame yourself and think that this is, I'm not doing well because it has something to do with me, when it's the system. The system is not designed, and that's a whole other fundamental thing. Is the purpose of schooling itself is intentionally ill-defined. Why is a child forced for 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, 9 months of the year for 12 years? Why are they there? What is it? And there are three reasons that are sort of bandied about and half-heartedly. One that's sort of dominant of the three, is theoretically that schools are supposed to impart literacy and skills, either literacy in reading or literacy in math, and that from these skills you can then take them to become self-actualized in some capacity. And well, we know from studies, in the United States, we have the Department of Education who regularly does studies every 4 years. They they have their reports, and they show just how piss poor the literacy rates are. and this is, the literacy rates just for adults in general. The highest level of literacy among how it's done is proficiency. That means that you can engage critically. You can do critical assessments of your reading. Well, only 13% of Americans are considered proficient in their reading skills. That doesn't mean that only 13% are literate. That means that they have the capacity to, and you'd think for that period of time, and it's worse in math. and then as far as the facts, most people forget the things they learn in school as far as the the factual knowledge and things. If you learn Spanish in school for however many years, most people can't speak a foreign language unless they're immersed in it. That's another story, but that's not school. So most people, and I contend that most people forget things intentionally, that it's a willed forgetting because of the environment. You want to forget, as opposed to if it was an organic development. Certainly, you don't forget the things you learned that you wanted to learn. If there's something you're passionate about on your own. So schools aren't there to develop literacy. They're definitely not there to develop skills for the workplace, because we have schools for that. We have vocation schools or technical schools, and those are quite effective at teaching work skills. But those aren't compulsory schools. Those aren't the things you learn. I
suppose the lazy question is, what's the alternative?
Like I said, so there are alternatives. I mean, the last thing, which as far as the third lesson of things that can be learned in school are which was promoted in the 1950s, was citizenry, democratic values, and that's long by the wayside. They don't even pretend to do that. In fact, certainly in the United States, and every single ruling relating to schools by the Supreme Court is that civil rights for students are an impediment to education.
Yeah.
so every rule, and even the most Orwellian is there was a ruling there was these students who wanted to protest Vietnam, and there was a case, Tinker v. Des Moines, where students fought to wear black armbands to protest Vietnam, and they won, and that's sort of heralded as this victory, but it wasn't, because there was a test that these various hurdles that the students had to overcome, so which set back student rights, that ruling, because you couldn't be disruptive. So if they had a message, because it was abstract and they weren't disruptive of their classmates, and there a few other things, that's why it was permitted, and it codified the curtailing of free speech that could be done in the classroom, as opposed to being a situation where students were free. And so it is an oppressive, authoritarian state. And in fact, I'm working on a paper right now that shows that students, and this I'm going to get to answer your question, but that anytime one does research on lab animals, one needs to or has to take into account the fact that the animals that were studied are in captivity. They're constrained to the degree that their preferred movements are limited. They're segregated from they're kept from their preferred, or detached from their environment that they're attached to. They're protected, that their survival needs are met, but then they're also tamed, so that privacy is reduced, and their flight, their desire to leave is curtailed. Well, schools meet all of these criteria. So students are literally in captivity when they're in a school environment, and there are consequences to being in captivity. So one thing is, I would say that all the psychology studies that are done on youth, certainly ones who are in school, need to acknowledge the fact that they've that they're affected by this. So they're only internally valid. But as far as alternatives go, so first off, if you're creating an environment where kids are not learning, where they're becoming neurotic and anxious, and they're not developing skills to the workplace, they're subject to possible self-harm and certainly harm to others. Many of them now have to be drugged to endure the system that they're placed in. Why would you want to do that to a kid? I mean, if you think, I'm a parent, and what do I want for my kids? I want them to be empathetic people who are intellectually curious and well-adjusted, who can think and act independently, and certainly believe in the democratic principles. Are they going to learn any of that at school? No, they're not going to become better human beings by being in that environment. It's not going to produce those effects. So one is nothing. Nothing is better. And then there are models where you try to work with the interests, and the way people learn best, and where people are willing to put in a lot of hard work, is where it doesn't feel like work, because you're pursuing the things that you're interested in, you're engaging. If you want to learn a musical instrument, I play guitar. When I first got that guitar, I slept with that guitar. I went to the bathroom with that guitar. And is that work? Well, I guess it was work. I'm learning. It didn't feel like work, but man, every waking hour, I've got that guitar in my hand, because I got so much out of developing it. I wanted to learn certain skills, but if I were taught in a certain way, well, maybe they'd be teaching me technical side of guitar and stuff. And it's like, I'd lose interest in the guitar real fast. I wanted to because for me, composition was the most interesting thing, and I'm trying to come up with new chords. So that's me. Maybe someone else is like, no, I want to play Bach. I could care less about composition. I don't have those skills. I want to learn the technical. Great, learn the technical, learn the fundamentals of scales too, and stuff like that. School doesn't permit that. They've got to grade you too. So school's going to be like, no, you're going to learn this. You're going to learn how to perform. And it's like, hell with that. I don't want to play guitar anymore. If it was taught in school. But so you want to. I think that the best model conceptually is the library. And working with librarians. So a good librarian, if you walk into a library and you're like, I want a book, I don't even know what I want. Libraries say, well, what are you interested in? And you'll say, I like cars. Really, you like cars? What do you like about cars? You like building them? Do you like racing them? Do you like, you like car racing? It's like, okay, well, here's sections of car racing. Now, do you want to know, about the history? Do you want to know, and now you're engaged, you're getting to learn, you've got a mentor who's not a teacher, who's a mentor, but that's a knowledgeable person, the librarian. They know how to help you find the things that you're interested in. They work with you, and they'll introduce you to things that you never even knew about it as well. So you're a kid, your experience is profoundly limited as to what you know about. And here you've got a person who's experienced, but they want to work with you, and then they might sit you down. I know you're interested in this, but let me tell you about this, and then you can either get excited or go, that is interesting, but that's not what I'm interested in. They'll tell you something. So they can work with you and focus on things. And so when I was doing research, I did this film called The War on Kids. I saw these kids who were homeschooled, and a bunch of them, there were like 6 or 8 of them, wanted to learn about building an electric car. They wanted to build their own, and they weren't interested in, I talked to one of the students, and she wasn't interested in math, but she realized that she wasn't going to be able to do some of the things that she wanted to do unless she had a real background in in physics and for design. And she said, I was motivated and I learned, so I understood the outcome and how it was relevant, and they became good in the necessary studies for that kind of thing. So So there's variations on this, and a lot of it, requires a kind of restructuring of society that, that is,
Yeah.
aspirational. But it's recognizing the harm of compulsory schooling in order to get there. And if you're a parent, you care about your kids, you should not want to send them to these places.
I'm trying to think as I've been listening. I'm trying to understand what the actual purpose of school is supposed to be. Not do you know what I mean? Because there's all these jokes that I always remember about people saying about you get taught, what you'll never learn. That thing they taught me in school. I never learned that when I was an adult. And outside of learning to read, which I do think is an important skill set, I'm not sure what I would describe the purpose of school to be. Because I think, like you said, and again, I'm not sure I know all of the answers. I'm trying, because I've never really had a discussion or listened to somebody at any great length who has a passion about it.
School has two functions. School has two, I don't want to say legitimate functions, but actual functions. One is it's a babysitting factory. It's a place where you can drop your kids. It's daycare. And that has, is helpful for parents. It's not helpful for kids. And the other is it sorts people to their to a proper social class. Those that do well in school are sorted, and then they go off to the better schools. So it's a sorting mechanism.
So I suppose the other way I should ask this, or I should present this, is I'm trying to figure out what the purpose of school should be. So if I'm going to develop a school system, the only thing that stands out in my mind is I do want every child to learn how to read and write correctly. I can't define to you, if I'm being put on the spot, I can't define to you what I think correctly is for reading and writing. But the only thing that stands out of, like, if somebody for whatever reason said, I think he needs to design a whole new school system, my priority is going to start at a foundational level. I want everybody to be able to read and write well. And I don't mean you have to, like I said, I'd have to figure out and define what that means and what would the purpose behind it be. But after that, I'm not sure what the next layer is. What springs to my mind would be I'd want some form of physical activity. But I'm also very conscious of a bias. Am I just reflecting what I wish school was for me? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
So as far as reading, it only takes a few months for anyone to learn how to read. And once you've learned, you can then develop those skills on your own, to the degree that you're motivated. But it doesn't take long to learn how to read, and
no, it doesn't.
And writing, is again, something that gets developed over time, and one can work on, but it doesn't require the institution the way it's designed.
No, and also I'm not sure what age you really have to learn to read and write by. I mean, does it matter whether I learned my ABC at 4 or whether I learned how to read and write at 10? I don't know the answer.
Generally, no. I mean, by the time you're 18, everyone kind of ends up at the same place anyway. Certainly. There's but in a regimented school environment, you have to learn at this age, you have to learn this at that age, and people develop differently, and if you're you might be some things you might be better at, and you're graded on where you are at a certain time, and then you internalize, you come to, that's the other thing with schooling is your failures are internalized, and if you're someone who would read great at 9, but not at 5. You're in a special reading group at 5, and you then, well, I'm a slow reader. I'm not a good reader. It's like, no, if you're gonna be, you could be just as great as anyone else in these things. You just.
So if you're gonna redesign a school system, what are your sort of starting blocks?
Well, I wouldn't have a school system exactly. Like I said, I'd want to impose, or not impose, but I'd want to promote and develop a library model of of having mentors work to develop,
Yeah, but
people's,
what
people's interests and skills,
what
and work with them, introduce them to new things, and
because this is the thing is, I think, like, I'm trying to think what my knowledge of schools really is historically, and unless you were wealthy 200 years ago, you probably weren't going to school. They're quite, in terms of human history, they're quite a modern phenomenon. And I think we're kind of, if you're a government, I think you do have to impose some sort of structure that every child is going to have some form of education. And I'm not in any, I'm using words that may be coming across as incredibly clumsy, because what I'm trying to find out is the problem is we're trying to get everybody under the same umbrella, and we're not even asking if it's raining. And it's like, but we got to have a blanket solution that covers everybody. And like you said, is I like the concept of the librarian approach, is, but sort of, but what I'm trying to imagine is, in the best case scenario, if we'll expand it to, you and I have been asked to come up with the ideal institution of education to start children out at. What age do we think they need to start at? And like I said, my guiding principle is, I think they should all have to, the first thing should be they need to learn to read and write. You can't drum into them, you're going to have to read and write for 8 hours a day for the next 6 months. So what else are they going to do? Do you know what I mean? And that's what I mean. What age? And there doesn't have to be an age restriction either. We can say, hey, they start at 9, and by 11, if they don't have a natural interest in something that we can academically develop, that they go off and do this. Do you know what I mean? What would it look like to you?
Well, you want to work with people as, treat people as individuals. I mean, I would add to that system apprenticeships and opportunities for there, and I'd like them to be somewhat egalitarian and meritocratic in terms of that. So it's not the most affluent or the only ones who can apply for apprenticeships in certain fields and things, but it certainly opens it up. But the you want right now our societies are structured where you have the marketplace of people and ideas, and we segregate the children and we segregate the elderly, and we remove them both once you get to be once you're below or above a certain age, you're literally segregated. And I think they both need to be brought in. It didn't used to be that way. And there may have been issues, or there were issues certainly with child labor and child labor laws that are good things. But at the same time, there was definitely a certain benefit. I mean, we've pathologized adolescence now, so certainly this approach isn't more enlightened in many ways than it was. I mean, when
it definitely isn't. I mean,
when you look at the Revolutionary, the Revolutionary War, the general, when Lafayette was 19 years old when he was a general of. So I mean, you look back and you see, that people who were in their teens were doing heroic things, in the not too distant past. The capacity for these, for this capacity would never be considered today, because, like I said, there's there is an infantilization as well as a pathologizing of people, and I don't think the extended adolescence that we've afforded is necessarily constructed or healthy. I think it's sort of the opposite. So I think people's capacities are severely underappreciated and undermined.
I remember a lady called Gwyn Bradbury, I think her name is. I had her on the podcast, and fascinating lady, because her and her husband had some really young children, and they realised we've got an opportunity to travel now that we might not have later in life. So I think there were 3 children. If I've got that wrong, Gwyn, I apologise. And they literally up sticks, went to places like Papua New Guinea and stuff like that, and just lived with tribes. No school, no hospitals, you know what I mean? and like no supermarkets, no nothing. And she said like the things that they had to let go of, like kids, you can't take toys with you. How are you going to carry them? You know. And she said you get to these little remote villages where there isn't anybody else. But she said it's just like, before you know it, kids are just going out to play when they want to play. Kids are just mixing with adults when you do. There's just no. It appears like there's no rules or thought, but actually there's loads of sort of social sort of rules, but they're not anything that we recognise. And it's all to do with kids will just learn by hanging out with older people. They will learn the skills they need to learn, and kids will go with the older people that they want to go with. They'll hang around with the kids they want to hang around with, and really what you hope for is that they all come back at roughly the same time at night, so you can all go to bed. Do you know? She said it's not like anything that they recognised, but she said these societies function perfectly.
In 5 minutes, you can tell who's been, if you talk to kids, you can tell who goes to a public school and who is homeschooled by how they interact with adults.
Yes.
The kids in compulsory schools, they don't want to talk to adults. They don't even know how to interact with adults, and homeschool kids, they'll just speak freely and treat adults as an equal, and have a much more more normal conversation that maybe adults don't want to interact with kids in that sort of way. But it's
I'm just quickly, because I'm conscious of time. Can you just give me a little bit more information about your book?
Yeah, so the book is designed to exploit all the flaws of schooling, of compulsory schooling. So, like I said, so stress is the big factor, and it is an approach, and I'm very keenly aware that it's impossible or nearly impossible for kids to organize. So all the different resistance approaches that are in the book are things that an individual can do on their own to undermine the system in all sorts of ways. It's about taking down the schools and exploiting the internal contradictions of schools. If you're under surveillance all the time, which you are, and that's one of the other key features of schooling is that you learn to be under surveillance. You learn to be monitored all the time. It becomes the norm. Well, guess what? With technology today, your teachers, you can record everything that your teachers and administrators are doing. There's public, in the United States, there's state employees. So their salaries are public information. If they go on a dating site, you can search all those things. If you're somewhat, mildly advanced, you can find, the criminal records. You can, so you can get all that information. You can flip it on the teachers and make all that, put all the stuff online on YouTube or whatever that you've been surveilling all the people. None of these people want to go public with their private lives, but you can, also file, various complaints, on the teachers. There's ways that you can overload the system by requesting you be treated as an individual. You can get religious accommodations, disabilities laws and things like that. All of the different entities that provide services to the schools are generally provide services to other places too. For the architect that designed the school, well, they're also designing the prisons and maybe another building, the place that provides food. Well, all these have some public rating, mechanisms. There's all sorts of sites where businesses are reviewed. As a student, you can come up with, in an evening, you can probably come up with 30 different identities and give 1 star to all these things and write up, horrible reviews that affect their capacity to do business. So you can affect, the lives of the employees of the school, the people who do business. Just make it all toxic. There's the property values are dependent on the illusion of how good your school is. You can certainly have an impact on the impression of whether your school is a place where people would want to move to the community. There's a whole list of things of that nature that students can take on as an individual that will have an impact. And it's not so much that the students will even do some of these things. I mean, there are some things I don't encourage or endorse any illegal activity, but there's all sorts of sabotage that students can do as well.
We don't endorse illegal activity, but we'll happily turn a blind eye, and there's no judgment.
I can explain and discuss things that have been done without saying,
No, I'm just joking.
Do not break things or steal things or vandalize or and there's all sorts of subtle ways that one, which is not endorsed or recommended, but there's very simple ways that you can do little things of removing screws, taking essential papers that teachers rely on, and which seems quite minor, but it really messes up the system in terms of its operation and capacity. And the thing with the handbook is you don't have to do any of these things, but just knowing that you could, having this book in your back pocket, helps alleviate the stress. You no longer feel powerless. You know that if they really push me hard enough, if it's really going that badly, there's a whole lot I can do to mess with the lives of the people who are putting me down. There's so much I can do to the system. I can get through the day knowing I can do this.
Yeah, because you're not powerless then, are you? You don't have that sense of feeling, I'm powerless.
Yeah, exactly. You no longer feel powerless, and so you don't even have to do anything, but that, if I'm pushed past my breaking point, I can. Yeah. Now I can get through the day. I can.
One of the greatest skill sets I've ever had, and I don't know where it came from, where it developed, I've always had the ability to read the small print. So when it comes to employment contracts, I'm really good. Because when people ask me to do things, I can tell them whether it's in my job description. And I don't mean that kind of negatively or like trying to be a job.
Work for yourself.
Yeah. I do actually work in healthcare for other people, but the amount of times, only recently there was an incident, and I just pointed out what the employment law said. And I was just like, and I'll happily see you. In the UK, we have a thing called ACAS, which is your workers' rights. And it's like, I'll happily see you at a tribunal. All just disappeared because, no, I knew the law, and they didn't. And I was just like, don't be fooled. But I don't know where this thing, I can sit down and read 13 pages of small print. It doesn't, I don't know why I'm able to do that. I just always have been. And it's quite annoying to people. So that's... I've just got one last question, which is completely random and not related to anything. And if possible, I'd love to have you back on the podcast again, because there's so many things I haven't been able to talk to you about. Do you know what I mean? If you don't mind, it'd be great to have you back on again. My last one is a random question for no reason other than I like asking it. I want you to imagine that you have a time machine. The time machine has to be a car or some mode of transport. So what car would you have? Where would you go, and what would be playing on the radio?
So where would I go, or when would I go?
Well, where and when?
Wow, this is a total question that I kind of love. I'd have to think about that a little bit. I think on the radio would be playing "I Am the Walrus."
Yeah, Beatles.
That much I know. Helter Skelter would be a close second. Where would I go? There are two places I really want to go. Well, three places that I really want to go. I've been to a lot of unusual places. Madagascar, Greenland, and Mongolia are on my list of places that I've never been. I guess if I'm in some amazing car, I'd probably want to be in Mongolia, because I could imagine there being open space to drive in.
Yeah.
so if I had to live in it for that reason, it'd be like, well, there'd be a lot of open spaces, and I could drive by yaks. Which car and when? I guess I wouldn't want to be in Mongolia anytime in the past. So the history of Mongolia is certainly not one that I would be encouraged to be there under Soviet rule or
Genghis Khan.
Any of the dynasties. So that kind of limits that to the present, and I'm a little too anxious about the future. Yeah, I don't know which car. I've never been inside of a Rolls Royce, so
Perfect.
I guess a Rolls Royce. Yeah.
Didn't the Beatles do something
So,
with a Rolls Royce?
oh, yeah, well, John Lennon had his psychedelic Rolls
That was
Royce.
it. That was it. Rolls
So
Royce.
yeah, that was.
That's perfect.
Yeah, he had it painted in this psychedelic design that became iconic. But it's funny you mentioned it. So I have I'm working on a film project right now that deals with a hypothetical question where I'm interviewing all these different celebrities in different fields, not just the arts, but in academia or anything. And I'm asking them if they could control all the conditions of their death, how they would like to die.
Ooh. The one that immediately springs in my mind is a joke. And it's, I want to die in my sleep, sound asleep, not screaming and panicking like the passengers in my car. But that's just a joke, and it is. But yeah, I think I'd want to fall asleep. Yeah, I'd want to be asleep, but I don't know why. I don't have an answer to this. But I like the idea of being asleep, like in a hammock outside as the sun's setting.
Yeah, I've only had one person. Only one person I've talked to has said they want to go in their sleep. I've been kind of amazed at how few people have said they want to die in their sleep. Yeah. Well, other than the one anomaly, everyone had some some story there. Many of them have been excellent. They've been really good. Actually, Paul McCartney's stepmother is one of the people I talked to, and
Oh wow!
And she said she wanted to be killed as part of a lover's triangle because she figures at the age of 95,
What a way to go!
Something's going right.
yeah, no, that's exactly right. This has been this has been absolutely brilliant, and I hope we can do it again. I'll get in touch with Albert. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. So people can go to CevinSoling.com. I got to do the plugging. You can find the books. Handbook on Amazon. You can find it at bookstores. If it's not in the bookstores, they can order it from the distributor. They will get the books out to the stores. But Amazon is certainly easy. Or you can go to my website, CevinSoling.com. But Kevin's with a C, CevinSoling.com. And there's other projects there too. Lots of other things I've done.
And I'll make sure all of the links are in the description. And thank you very much for your time.
Well, this was an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed this a great deal.
Thank you. And there you go. That was Cevin, the author of the Student Resistance Handbook. The links will be in the description to his website. Please do check him out. He's a filmmaker, a documentary maker. He's done a great many things. I'm definitely looking forward to getting him back on the podcast. And yeah, it's interesting. I definitely get caught up on what is the correct way to school and educate children. And I'm a believer in, if you don't have an answer to the problem, maybe you're not best placed to be talking about it. But what are we going to do to change the education system? How do we revolutionize it? And will it ever happen in my lifetime? There has to be more meaningful ways to make a child and a teenager's life productive. So, with that being said, thank you very much for listening, for watching, the comments, the supports, the people who share, and the people that have followed this podcast. I do appreciate it. And wherever you're from, whatever you believe, please do take care and be blessed. Thank you.